Welcome to the DVERT Brief. I'm Dr. Meg McBride, Director of the Domestic Violent Extremism Research and Translation Center at CNA. This podcast series highlights new research, trends, and findings on violent extremism in America, designed for policymakers, practitioners, and anyone curious about the evolving domestic threat landscape. This AI-generated podcast delivers concise and accessible summaries of our latest work. Thanks for listening.
In today's episode, we'll be exploring key insights from our report Trends and Recommendations, Homicides in K-12 Schools. Let's dive in.
So let's start with a question I think a lot of people will immediately have. Are we talking about school shootings the way most people picture them? Columbine, Sandy Hook, Uvalde?
Well, the public's picture of school-based gun violence is shaped almost entirely by those catastrophic high-profile events, and that selective attention has genuinely distorted how we approach prevention.
How so?
Across 398 incidents in the dataset, most incidents fell into the category of general gun violence at schools. Only 35 of those incidents, about 8.8%, met the definition of an active shooter incident, meaning someone actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a populated area, like what happened in Uvalde, Parkland, and Sandy Hook.
So the active shooter scenario is actually the exception, not the rule.
Right, and yet it dominates the conversation. Active shooter incidents are rare, but they are disproportionately deadly. Despite making up only 8% of incidents, they account for 27% of all deaths and 61% of all injuries, so they absolutely demand attention. But if prevention strategies are built only around that scenario, they'll miss the vast majority of what's actually happening on and around school grounds.
Let's stay on active shooter incidents for a moment, because I think the data there are pretty striking. Who are these perpetrators?
This is where things get really important for practitioners. In nearly 80% of K-12 active shooter incidents, the perpetrator was a current or former student at that school. They were insiders, which helps explain why so many common security measures fall short. These individuals had legitimate access to the building. They knew the routines, they knew the entry and exit points. They would have participated in the very lockdown drills designed to stop them.
That's a pretty unsettling point about drills and perimeter security. We'll come back to what that means for school safety measures. But first, who are these perpetrators in terms of age and background?
The median age was 17. The most common age was 15. 57% were legal minors. Nearly 3/4 had exhibited at least one documented warning sign beforehand. Things like increased aggression, fascination with weapons, expressions of hopelessness, or growing withdrawal and isolation. And perhaps the most consequential data point, in more than half of cases, the perpetrator leaked their plans before the attack. They told someone, online, in writing, or in person to classmates, parents, or teachers. In many cases, it was a cry for help.
So these were not undetectable threats.
Not at all. Most were in crisis. 74% showed evidence of suicidality. More than half told someone what they were planning, and nearly half had studied prior school shootings, drawing on past attacks for identity and meaning. That dynamic, especially as it plays out in certain online spaces, is a serious and growing concern.
Now, let's talk about that other 90-ish%, the 363 incidents that weren't active shooter events. What's happening there?
Those incidents look much more like community violence that happen to spill onto school grounds. Nearly 80% took place outside the school building, and a similar share occurred outside of class time. The most common situation was an escalation of a dispute, about 36% of cases, followed by retaliation and gang or group-related violence. The perpetrator profile is completely different, too. Only 25% had any connection to the school at all, while about a third were strangers with no known affiliation. And there's a striking temporal trend. From 2000 to 2019, these incidents averaged about 10 per year. After 2020, that number nearly tripled to 28 per year, tracking closely with the broader national homicide spike that began in mid-2020.
That context matters enormously for how schools and communities respond. So given all of this, what does it mean for what prevention should actually look like?
The through line across all of the recommendations is this: invest upstream, not just in hardware. Access control and locked doors have real value when a threat is external, but they function as a delay mechanism, not a prevention strategy when the threat comes from inside. And for active shooter incidents, the threat almost always comes from inside. What matters most is the human infrastructure around prevention. Schools need simple, trusted, anonymous reporting pathways so that warning signs and leaked plans actually get flagged. They need standing behavioral threat assessment teams, not ad hoc groups assembled after a crisis. And threat cases need to be framed around crisis and need rather than danger and punishment. That framing actually improves cooperation from students and families.
And what about the role of suicide prevention? That seems woven through so much of this.
It really is. Strengthening suicide prevention and crisis response also reduces the risk of outward-directed violence, because targeted school violence so frequently emerges from trajectories marked by despair and suicidal ideation. Crisis intervention training, trauma screening, continuity of mental health support, these aren't just mental health issues. They're violence prevention strategies. There's also a practical case around firearm access. Because most active shooters are minors who obtained weapons from their home environment, secure firearm storage is a critical upstream intervention. Framing those conversations around child safety and suicide prevention, rather than criminal enforcement, is key to improving uptake and trust.
So the bottom line for policymakers and practitioners seems to be, don't just build taller fences. Build better early warning systems and support structures.
Exactly. The most consequential prevention steps, recognizing warning signs, creating trusted reporting pathways, conducting threat assessments, responding to crisis early, all happen before a weapon ever reaches a school. The fundamental argument is to align investments with where the actual risk is.
This podcast was produced with the assistance of artificial intelligence tools, but the content was based on research done by the DVERT Center, which is embedded within CNA, a nonprofit research and analysis organization dedicated to advancing the safety and security of the nation. Production of the DVERT Brief is supported by the National Institute of Justice under Award Number 15, PNIJ 24GK 00750D OMR. The opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect those of the Department of Justice.